7. Michael's in here. Okay, council, I'm going to get us started here. Welcome to your Tuesday, May 7th council work session. I'll call us to order and turn it over to David Cook.
Thank you and good afternoon, everybody. All right, jumping right in. We've got a few recognitions to do. First, I'm going to call on Assistant City Manager Fernando Costa, who's going to recognize a group. Fernando.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cook. The staff in our Neighborhood Services Department performs excellent work in promoting the development of affordable housing and the revitalization of our lower-income neighborhoods in cooperation with Fort Worth Housing Solutions and other partners in the community. You know about their good work. Many of our residents know about their good work, but it's good from time to time to receive recognition from peers in cities across the country. And just last week, the National Association of Local Housing Finance Agencies, meeting in their annual conference at Las Vegas, reviewed applications from cities across the country and selected the Fort Worth Housing Finance Corporation and the Neighborhood Services Department to receive their annual Home Excellence Award. And we have the award to display for you today. And we'd like to take this opportunity. Oops, we did have it. It's still intact. But we're happy to recognize employees in our Neighborhood Services Department for their performance. They were recognized because they supported the Cowan Place project, 174-unit senior apartments in the revitalizing Stop 6 neighborhood. The City Council, and as the council and serving as the Housing Finance Corporation Board, has been instrumental in the success of that project, which is, as of this month, 100% leased by eligible residents. That's a great success story in a part of Fort Worth that for decades had been languishing in a pursuit of new investment. The national organization wanted to recognize Fort Worth because we were able creatively to combine multiple funding sources that usually don't go together into a single project to make this project successful. Sources such as the Home Investment Partnerships Program, the Urban Development Action Grant, or UDAG, Community Development Block Grant, funds from the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, as well as funds from the Housing Finance Corporation, which included funding for permanent supportive housing, 9 units of permanent supportive housing for folks who otherwise would be homeless. Not to mention the Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant that we received with Housing Solutions and other sources. So this is a great success story. We'd like to bring forward the community development team from Neighborhood Services. And if you would, please come forward as I call your name. Chad LaRoque, Leticia Rodriguez, Leah Brown, Diane Anderson, Justin McLaughlin, and Amy Connolly. Please recognize these outstanding employees.
I just want to say I'm glad that Fernando broke the award and not myself. Besides my team, I have a great team. We work on several housing projects across the city. And so I thank them. They're great. Also in our department, we have our finance division, our compliance division, and then also saw Mary Margaret here, so, definitely they're a lead partner. And then Joanne Gunn, who's here, who was the attorney on this at the time, so she put in a lot of hours as well, so thank you.
Thank you. Somebody quickly secure that award. Next, I'm going to call on Christiane Simmons to recognize a new employee in her department.
Thank you, David. I am pleased today to introduce you to the Fort Worth Lab's newest Assistant Director, Christy Lemon. Some of you might recognize Christy from the number of roles she's held in the organization, including in police, community relations, the old community relations department, now CPE, planning and development, performance and budget, HR, and library. Her work has focused on community organizing, neighborhood association development, process improvement, employee performance and training, HR strategies, and now budget. And Christy is brilliantly talented and embodies the curious and collaborative spirit of the Fort Worth Lab. She has an absolutely stellar reputation, which is no small feat because she's been with the city since 2003. So we're so pleased to have snagged her for the Assistant Director of Operating Budget role at such a critical time for the Fort Worth Lab. So I'll let Christy say a few words.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm really excited to work with such a talented team in the Fort Worth Lab. And I just celebrated my 20th year here. So I'm excited to take everything that I've learned in all the different parts of the organization that I've worked in and use what I know to try to improve the budget process and develop our staff for amazing careers for the future. So thank you all.
All right, next we'll call up Assistant City Manager Valerie Washington to announce a new department head.
All right, thank you, David. Mayor and council, I am pleased to be here today. After working with CPS HR Consulting and doing an extensive executive recruitment, we were on the lookout for a new Environmental Services Department Director, the inaugural director for this brand new department. We were looking for someone who had experience in the 7 key areas: solid waste and recycling, TCEQ, air quality and soil quality testing, brownfields and hazardous cleanups, litter, policy experience, consumer health, and landfills and transfer stations. And we were able to get all of that experience in Dr. Cody Wittenberg. And I would like to have him come up and say a few words. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Valerie, and good afternoon, and thank you to all of you. I would say our city team is so amazing, and I just want to say thank you for your collaboration and support over the last few months, and for taking the risk to develop a new environmental services department here in the city, and to bring that ethos forward. Really excited to see where we go from here, and I just want to say also thank you to my environmental services team. It would not be possible without them and all of you, so thank you.
Cody, congratulations, well-deserved. And I just want to tell management, I told you so.
All right. Next up, I'm going to call on Deputy City Manager Mark McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. So I have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to the city's first Veterans Affairs Officer. It was a very rigorous process. We had over 600 applications and a thorough process. And so he is one of our own. I want to ask Joaquin Castillo to come on up. So Joaquin is, he was actually Code Enforcement Officer of the Year. He's currently working for Renee and his group, or was, and now working with us. And we're so delighted to have him on board, particularly since he is a veteran. And he also has experience in Veterans Affairs work in a previous position. So please welcome Joaquin.
Thank you, Mark. I am humbled and excited being selected as the first City of Fort Worth Veteran Affairs Officer. As a combat ranger, I understand the unique challenges veterans face every day. My passion was always serving the veterans, and now I get to do it for the 42,000 veterans. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
And David, I just want to acknowledge Councilmember Beck for initiating the process, and to Charlie Larsdorf, First Sergeant on Zoom today. Thank you for making sure this was made possible, and to Mark McDaniel and your team for shepherding it through. I cannot think of a better person in Joaquin to represent the city of Fort Worth with our veteran community. So congratulations, great work.
All right, next up are informal reports. The first informal report is agenda process for boards and commissions. And Jeanette Goodall is available if there are any questions. Moving on. The second informal report is on employee entry wage analysis. And Deanna Giordano is available if there are any questions.
Yes, and as she's coming up, thank y'all for putting this on the agenda this week. Just to set the stage, I think that it's important that every City of Fort Worth employee earn a wage that allows them to live a thriving life here in Fort Worth. And it's becoming increasingly difficult, as we all know, for Fort Worth residents and our employees to do. In Tarrant County, when we look at a 2-adult, 2-children household, each adult in that household has to make $16.20 just to survive. And if for a single adult household, it's $14.86. When we look at that same household, in order for that household to have a stable household budget, each adult has to make $27.07 in order to maintain that more financially stable life, including a 10% savings for things we all need, such as savings, but also emergencies like an EMS ride, and also for education, and also to buy a home one day. So it's incredibly important that we not only lead as we have on so many affordability issues, especially all the great work we've done on housing, but I think especially it's important for us to make what is a reasonable investment, as you'll see, to ensure that our employees, every employee, earns a wage and they can live here in the great city of Fort Worth. So, Deanna, would you mind giving an overview? And then I would love for my council colleagues to have a discussion on what it would look like to get as close to $20, if not more than $20 an hour for wages for our employees here.
And thank you, Jared. And as you walk through this, Deanna, I might request, because this is an IR and we have a pretty full agenda today, that I hear clearly we have more to do on this. So if you're okay with it, Councilmember Williams, let's walk through the IR, get base level information, ask questions as needed, and then put this on as an actual work session agenda item so that we give it adequate time. So that staff may be able to be prepared to have that conversation as we head to the next budget.
Okay, will do. So Deanna Giordano, Human Resources Director, and I'll provide an overview of the IR that's before council today. And so I want to start off with just the proposal that the Human Resources Department is making for fiscal year 25. What we are recommending is to increase the current minimum wage rate of $15.45 to $16.07. And the reason $16.07 is we're adjusting all of the pay structures by 4%. So that moves the entire pay ranges for all of the city's structures equitably to include the minimum wage rate. In addition, in fiscal year 25, the Human Resources Department is proposing a comprehensive compensation study. The last study that was conducted is in 2014, and just given the volatility of the market with people, supply, demand, wages, we feel it's important for us to advance a compensation study. We also look at market data when we make these decisions, and so we do a biannual review of market data and market both public and private data. The last review was conducted last year with implementations that went in 23. And so that data we rely heavily upon to make these market decisions, to include the current proposal for fiscal year 25. In addition, just over historically since 2014, we've increased the minimum wage rate in City of Fort Worth from $7.88 just 10 years ago in 2014 to the current $15.45. So a significant increase over that 10-year period, but a more significant increase in fiscal year 22 when we went from $11.31 to $15 an hour, which kind of disrupted our system. In the non-exempt pay salary classifications, we have just under 200 jobs that were comprised in 14 pay grades. That is now collapsed to 11. So it's just something we have to be mindful of when you have entry-level positions that start to create compression vertically, meaning that you have individuals with basic levels of education and experience bumping up against pay with individuals in that same classification with higher levels of experiences or special experiences for those roles. It also creates vertical compression. So not only do you have the compression in the pay grade, you have compression in jobs that are very different. So jobs with entry classifications bumping up against jobs with even special licenses like a CDL or special certifications or even special experience that even garners kind of a better wage in the marketplace.
And is that what you were trying to articulate in Table B?
Table A and Table B will show you kind of those different types of jobs and where that vertical compression will be created.
Thank you.
The vertical and horizontal compression. We also did look at some of the alternative minimum wage rates, and so these are just some examples that were provided that are listed in the IR. So we looked at everything from $18 to $21.17 to $25.95. And with that, the first thing that I want to point out is you'll see—
Deanna, can I just jump in really quick? I'm sorry. There was also another
An addendum.
table that I requested that didn't make it into the IR.
Okay.
And it has wages at 50 cents increments from 1607 to 2595. And it also has the pay increase cost estimate on the budget. And so that's something that's in your inboxes that didn't make it into the.
That Deanna sent
report.
today?
Correct.
And then there's
Yeah.
also a minimum wage survey that compares cities like City of Austin at $20, City of Dallas at 18, City of Denton at 18.25, City of Richardson at 18.89, and City of San Antonio at $18, Dallas County at 18.24.
Yeah, so two addendums that were included that were sent via email by Patricia Garcia, so that is also included. So the table that you have in your IR has four different types of scenarios, the one that's being proposed, as well as the 18, the 21.17, and 25.95. But again, just as a reminder, you have available information from a recent survey or recent impact analysis to review the pay structure and the impact that it would cost to raise the individuals that would be impacted. And then there's also a compression component, so kind of two different bits of information there. In addition, what you'll see is kind of just overall impact to the salary structure. And again, that's just as we collapse pay grades and job titles, we have to be mindful of those individuals that have committed to the organization and brought their experience, so that information is noted there. One thing that kind of sets us apart from other entities in and around the metro area is just our pension contributions. We have one of the highest in the state, and so you'll see that reflected in the table on the second to the last page. And so the data there, where we're looking at maybe paying someone $20 an hour, the real rate is $30 an hour, in that we have the pension contribution as well as some of the benefit changes. So just something we have to be mindful of as we look at making modifications. So we want to make sure that all of that information is presented. To Councilmember Williams' point, we did absolutely provide different scenarios. So we looked at everything from 1650 to 17 to 1750. That information is available in the handout. And then we did refresh kind of just the minimum survey data to include some of the large Texas cities. If you look at the reference in the closing of our IR, we basically are still recommending the 1607. The information in the metro area is showing that the hourly minimum wage rate of our metro area cities is $14.74. If you look at adding in the Texas large cities, it's $15.48. And we threw out El Paso because it tends to just kind of drag the numbers down, and it's not really the market where we draw labor from. And then the minimum survey data that's included there, you can dismiss El Paso, and then we included the counties that are in our area only as a reference point. So just wanted to make that clear as well.
And Jared, you may have mentioned it when you're in your opening comments, but what was the minimum base pay rate that you were advocating for with staff?
I was advocating for 20. I got pushback from staff.
But it's 20 is what you're asking for?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know that Mayor Pro Tem may have some to say to this as well, but organizations in the city are starting to move to $21.07.
Okay, thank you. Gina?
I want to say I have the utmost respect for my Chinese eating food friend, Deanna. She's brought a level of professionalism to this department. But I also want us to take a look at, we need to have the will to bring our employees up to a higher level of pay. Mary Margaret is in the audience right now. At Fort Worth Housing Solutions, no one employed there makes under $21 an hour. And that is not going to get you a vacation. But if we have the will to do so, we will get there. And it's my desire that we do everything we can to make sure our employees don't have to job hop just to get to a better place. We cannot tout retirement if they're at a rate where they can't afford to stay here that long. And so that's very important to me. And there is a very real example just around the corner at Fort Worth Housing Solutions. Who knows what they're paying at DFW, but that's important that we try to get there. And I'm fine for studies, but David, I told you about your priority-based budgeting is going to unveil waste. We know that it will. And so there is money here. We just have to have the will to find it and the will to make sure we're spending taxpayers' dollars wisely. And Deanna, thank you for your report. Jared, thank you for bringing this up.
Any other questions from council? No? Go ahead, Jeanette, please.
I mean, I know we're planning for a comprehensive market study in fiscal year '25. Can we not just find the money to do it now?
The comprehensive market study? I would have to defer to the Fort Worth Lab or to city manager. It's about a,
I think, again, this is a really important conversation. Let's table this and bring it to a work session so that we're not rushing through the rest of the agenda that's set for today, if we're okay with that. But to Councilmember Martinez's point, she'd like to bring that up as well at the top of the agenda when we do this in a work session. I don't know if it works this month, but at least at the very beginning of June as a work session item, especially as we head into the budget cycle. Any other things you want added? Yes, please,
I'll
Jared.
just add, that was the goal of today, was to get it to today. We've been
Yeah.
working on this for months, and it hasn't
I think
got
that's very
here.
fair.
And so I would like us to dedicate some time in June. I know that staff has some time crunch with the budget, and so June would give them enough lead time to be able to do what they need to do.
That
So
works for me.
Thank you for that, Mayor.
And anything else that you want to make sure is covered during that session, please make sure you send that to Deanna to include. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, the next informal report is on the municipal court and their community engagement, and William Rumley is available if there are any questions.
William, you have these flyers here. Can you tell us about this summer program?
Howdy, Mayor and Council and staff, William Rumley, Court Director. So there is some flyers at your tables, your table, one large table. On the Summer Earn and Learn program, it's a great program that we partner with North Texas Central Goodwill as well as Texas Workforce Commission. And that program helps individuals 15 to 22. So the city has been participating in that for almost 8 years now. It was one of the original starting agencies that helped start that program. I think Code Compliance actually was the first department to reach and assist with folks at the Animal Center. And so since then, the city has participated. It's a great program. It's an opportunity for us to engage and include others in our community with other abilities. And so that program, there's 2 cohorts this summer. And so we're looking forward to participating in that program again this year. And then if you don't mind, just shameless plug, there's other flyers there. Next week is Police Week. And so we'll be doing an event next Wednesday to recognize our law enforcement arm in the court, the marshals. And with that, we'll have food trucks as always at the court. We like to party with local community food trucks, and so they will be there as well. So we want to invite you to come participate with us. And we do have a community tie as well as individuals coming to present the colors from one of the local middle schools, as well as one of the former marshals' fathers coming to do the prayer. So invite you all to come as well.
Thank you, William.
Thank you. Next informal report is on FEMA grant opportunities for fire prevention and eligible uses, and Chief Davis is available if there are any questions. All right, the next one is on urban area security initiatives, otherwise known as UASI, and the proposed projects and process to apply for the 24 UASI grant funds. And Chief Davis and Christiane are available if there are any questions. We're rolling now. Next informal report is on the City of Fort Worth residential charges. Christiane Simmons is available if there are any questions. All right, and then the final informal report is on workforce and business reporting for federally funded housing and community development projects.
I do want to hear a report on this.
Christina Brooks.
Christina, as you're coming, I don't want to give a complete history of Section 3, but I would like for you to be able to communicate to the viewing public what the changes are to be eligible.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Christina Brooks. So just a quick overview. There was a rule change for Section 3, which is a federal program. So these are not programs that the city is directly responsible for enforcing. What we can do is report on that or request that our development partners and contractors report on their work with Section 3 and the numbers. And so there were a couple of distinct changes that took place in 2020, in September of 2020. These rule changes redefined what a Section 3 business is, and those are that the business either has to be one of these three things, either 51% or more owned by low or very low income persons. The other way that you can qualify as a Section 3 business is that 75% or more of the labor hours for a project is performed by low or very low income persons, or 51% or more is owned by a current resident of a public housing or a Section 8 assisted housing location. So those are the major rules, and there are some calculations on how labor hours are actually calculated there, and there are a couple of other things about what targeted Section 3 workforce look like. One of those is within a 1 mile radius of the project. All of the workforce that's within that area that qualifies as Section 3 or targeted Section 3, that's how they're defining it. And youth build is also, youth build participants would also qualify as Section 3 workforce.
And so for the public who wants more information, should they contact you? Can they contact your office?
Yes, they can contact our office, and we'll be happy to give them kind of a fact sheet of how to work with developers to meet Section 3 requirements.
Okay, thank you. That's all I need. I'm going to wrap it up by looking to Mary Margaret in case I say something wrong. In English, in pure and simple plain English, Section 3 required if you were working on a HUD-funded project, if you lived in the area, you could find a job within that area. Mary Margaret with Forward Housing Solutions hired a volunteer who was cleaning the park at no pay. He was able to get hired. He was a Section 3 person. So the changes there do impact geography and the makeup. But if you are living within that range, you need to know that there is still money available. Did I say that right? Okay, thank you. And for those of you wondering why I have this brick, this is a brick from Cabell Public Housing that Mary Margaret and her team demolished. And we are now rebuilding Stop 6 thanks to Forward Housing Solutions. Thank you for my brick. Yeah, you can clap for the brick. For the brick. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. That's all.
Council, that's the conclusion of our IRs. I'll move on. Any changes or questions regarding memberships, boards, or commissions, or anything on M&C logger zoning cases? If not, go ahead.
Just on zoning cases, Mayor, on ZZ 24012. This case is in the Stockyards on West Exchange. Our newly minted Stockyards Inc. is working with the developer there. We're still waiting for information, right? We're still waiting to see a site plan, so a lot of these discussions are still in play, including waivers on height. So that's
Do you anticipate continuing that item?
At this
next
point,
week?
if we don't get more information, that's what I'm considering.
Okay.
But talks are,
Ongoing.
yeah.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Yes,
I
Councilman.
have one as well on appointments. I'll be appointing Kalisha Stevenson to the Board of Adjustment Commercial because we have a vacancy there. I'll be coming back with another appointment to fill her seat. I know staff may be wondering what's going on with that, so we'll be filling the community development seat. We're just doing a switch.
Thank you. Okay, council, we'll move into our first work session item, which is recommendations from the Ad Hoc Council Committee on Emergency Medical Response. Val Washington, ACM, will kick things off. As Val gets started, I have to say thank you to our members of council who served on our ad hoc committee. It's been a long but important process, and also incredible thanks to the Fort Worth Fire Department, Chief Davis, MedStar leadership led by Ken Simpson and their board, and of course, Fire 440. And with that, I'll let Val get us started.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you for this opportunity. I think you've kind of set the stage, but if everyone in the audience will recall, back last spring, we started working with the Fort Worth Mayor and Council about potentially helping out MedStar fiscally for fiscal year 24. And once we started having those conversations, we determined it was best to work together. We hired Fitch and Associates to come in and really do a deep dive evaluation of the EMS system, in addition to Mayor Parker forming this committee back in August. It's been I'd say the last few months have been hard and fast and heavy as we've worked with Fitch and all of our partners. It's been a coordinated effort with MedStar, with hospital CEOs, with member city elected officials and city managers, their fire chiefs, many of which are here today in this audience to support this conversation. Additionally, we have Thomas Moore from Fitch and Associates online, so he's available as well to answer any questions. And we have Hillary Shine, who's been a critical part of the conversation. And then I have some backup with Taylor Paris from the Attorney's Office, who's also been critical to these conversations. So today we will cover the following items. We'll just briefly walk through the EMS ad hoc committee process, the committee recommendations, the fiscal impacts of the recommendations, and then next steps for implementation and transition. And Mayor had already called out, we had 5 council members that were tasked to serve on this committee. And I appreciate all of their time for the meetings that we had and the amount of materials that we sent and data. Many times that we got to them late, but they were still able to really take that time to review just because there was a lot of material to share and make sure that we were passing along with this committee. Again, the mayor established the committee back in August. Through this committee, the Fitch team came on site. They were at just about every one of the EMS ad hoc committee meetings and provided a couple of briefings along the way to keep the committee updated. So we were able to get to a point to offer recommendations by the proposed deadline in the resolution, which was by April 30th. Throughout the EMS review process, it was really important that we work with the many stakeholders who are involved. We had discussions with the member cities and set up a regular cadence of meetings with them to ensure they understood and were a part of the process as we worked through EMS services. We met multiple times with hospital CEOs who are also a big part of this conversation as they get those EMS patients into their hospitals, and it's important that they have a good incoming flow and that the patients arriving are ready to be prepped where a doctor could jump right in and start working on them. We worked with Tarrant County Medical Society, who really raised some concerns about ensuring that we maintained independent medical direction, which is important from just having good clinical oversight, but they wanted to make sure that clinical piece was separate, and we talked with them about that. We also spent time with Ken Simpson, the MedStar CEO, Dr. Jeffrey Jarvis, the MedStar medical director, and then also with the local 440. As part of, I think it was on our April 16th committee meeting, we set up a feedback opportunity for these stakeholders to come in person. Staff, we've been meeting with these stakeholders and having great conversations, but it was important for the committee members to hear directly from these stakeholders. So we created that opportunity, excuse me, at the April 16th meeting and had folks sign up, and they were able to share and express concerns or hopes that they have with some of the system changes we're proposing. Again, in working with the MedStar member cities, there are 14 of us in the current member cities. We've been meeting with the 13 other cities. And really some of their concerns as we walk through this is making sure they understood what an expense structure would look like moving forward. We haven't been paying for EMS services, so this is a new expense for budgets. They wanted to make sure that we were looking at governance structures and that through that process, they would have a seat at the table through advisory boards or some other way to make sure that we were hearing their concerns and also sharing with information with them. And I would say the other thing that we talked a lot about were just the current assets in the MedStar system and how through the current interlocal agreement, we would need to work together to really keep a hold of those assets and make sure that those transferred in a way that we would be usable for an EMS system moving forward. Some of the strategies to address the member city concerns, again, in addition to setting up a regular cadence of meetings, we held some one-on-one meetings with them. We held a city managers lunch for city managers and elected officials to really have an opportunity to dig into some of the mechanics. And we think that we have developed some solutions collaboratively that could really get us to a place where the member cities are in concert and moving forward as we make these EMS changes together. I mentioned the hospital CEO feedback. I think it's important in meeting with them. They praised MedStar for the high quality of clinical and patient care. They talked about some of the leadership. They talked about making sure that MedStar was planning. But one of the items that came up were challenges with the interfacility transport process. And that's the process to transport between hospitals and nursing facilities, dialysis facilities, other nursing facilities. And so we spent a lot of time working with them on that item. Fitch, it was one of their early recommendations to the EMS Ad Hoc Committee to look at removing the IFTs from the 911 service calls and really isolating those and working with the hospital CEOs to privatize that work. We are going to be working with the hospital CEOs and others, again, the dialysis centers and others, to really work through what that privatization process would look like, what kind of guardrails need to be developed, and the timing for doing that. We estimate, I don't know if I put it on the slide, but we estimate probably a 6 to 12 month time frame. But again, we're setting up an interfacility working group to sit down with those stakeholders to really craft what that needs to look like. I mentioned, the Tarrant County Medical Society and some of their concerns and really key focus areas. I'd say as a result of their conversations, we are setting up a stakeholder group to focus directly on the Office of the Medical Director and really making sure we're structuring that the right way and providing it with the necessary resources. And then this is just kind of an overview of how we see that potentially being set up, with an Office of the Medical Director reporting up to the city manager's office, the same way as the fire department, so you would have some independence in that reporting structure. So now to get onto the EMS Ad Hoc Committee recommendations. Again, the committee worked tirelessly over the past few months, and I'm proud of the work and that the committee was able to really boil down their month's work into some recommendations. Anyways, I apologize. I am so hot in here today, so I apologize. So just a quick overview of the EMS Ad Hoc Committee recommendations. As I go through this too, please, EMS Ad Hoc Committee members, feel free to jump in and provide additional context. So there are 10 overall recommendations that fall into 3 categories: interfacility transports, governance, and then EMS system changes. All of those, thank you. All of those recommendations are based on the same baseline assumptions. They're based on a 0.50 unit hour utilization, an 8-minute travel time 90% of the time. It anticipates that there would be governance changes, and then also that we would move the interfacility transports from the 911 calls. So the first 2 recommendations are on interfacility transports, and again, that's to privatize the IFT process, remove that call volume from the 911 system, and then establish a working group to make sure that we're facilitating and setting this up the right way.
And important there, to go back one, sorry Val,
Yes.
thank you. And any of the committee members should chime in here too, but that second item was something that our hospital CEOs asked for specifically to help with the process, which I thought was a really good sign that we have the right level of stakeholder engagement. Just wanted the rest of the council to know that that was the case. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
And in discussions about how the current system works, what we found was that the reimbursement and the cost with the IFTs, it didn't really make sense to continue to operate them internally. And so that's a big reason, it's another big reason why we opted to go out on that one.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And we really have appreciated the time we spent with the hospital CEOs who've been willing to come together in meetings and really talk as a whole system, and their creativeness and willingness to come together and continue these conversations are hopeful. On the governance recommendations, there are 4 of those, and they focus on, They focus on, 1, making sure the governance of the EMS system is really under the control of the Fort Worth City Council. And we're working through the specifics of what that will look like. The EMS ad hoc committee meeting let Mayor Parker know it was okay if she continued having conversations with the current MedStar board members and really working through what a transition period would look like, and then that process for making any potential board changes throughout this transition process. Additionally, we agreed that we would set up a board structure or an advisory board structure where the member cities, the first responders, and others would have a pathway to leadership to talk about issues and other concerns that would come up. We'll be working with Fitch and Hillary and, Chief Davis to really set up that advisory structure and make sure we're meeting all of those marks. We are going to, or the committee is recommending that we work to memorialize the service levels for each of the member cities through service level agreements. We are in the process now of working with city legal to see what that agreement would look like and the components of that. And then we're continuing to work with the member cities on what they would need in that agreement to be comfortable.
And added additional information there on those last 2 items, that we're working with member cities. Understandably, many of them have not been as intimately involved with MedStar over the years and may not have realized there were any potential issues. And so to mitigate any surprise factor, those conversations went back and forth. Staff did a great job. Carlos spent a lot of time with member cities to get them to understand how important this transition was, not just for the city of Fort Worth, but also for their residents. And that 4th item is we also want to be really fair to some of our smaller member cities that have a much smaller budget impact and try to spread out some of that fiscal impact over several years if that's needed. So those negotiations are ongoing. And in the meetings I've attended with management or mayors, they seemed grateful for that out of fairness. We still will make sure all cities pay their fair share, so to speak, but I think there's some great solutions on the table that'll help mitigate some of that cost of member cities.
Thank you, Mayor. And we've committed to continue that conversation with the member cities and then reporting back and sharing that information with the mayor and council as we complete those conversations. And I do appreciate Mark McDaniel, our deputy city manager, who's really been able to come in and help us navigate some of those conversations and come up with some really good win-win ideas that allow the member cities to pay their fair share and for also us to understand some of the timing that will be needed for them to do that. And then lastly, we have EMS system recommendations. And these recommendations, the first one is to create a single role EMS position within the fire department. And that language is very important, a single role EMS position. Secondly, that the single role EMS position will be classified as a civil service position. We are working now with city attorney's office, with HR, with MedStar, with fire department to really walk through, along with the local 440 and what that process and timing looks like. The other recommendation that we've mentioned before is to maintain the independent medical direction and ensure that the Office of the Medical Director is staffed appropriately to conduct their business. And then lastly, that staff will establish an EMS steering committee and a working group structure to ensure that these conversations are moving forward in the right way, in a transparent way, in a way that we can continue reporting back to mayor and council throughout the process. We're proposing that there would be working groups, again, to focus on interfacility transports, working on the MedStar employee transitions and culture and benefits and really making sure we're addressing that correctly. And that's a committee Deanna and her team will help us lead up. We're going to fold in the 911 working group into the structure so we can continue to provide updates on that work. And again, a committee that will focus on the Office of the Medical Director and make sure we're setting up that structure appropriately.
Val, let's pause on the other slide for a moment. I'm just going to ask council that was not a part of the ad hoc if there are any questions or needs of clarification for what we mean by single role EMS position and how that relates to a dual role firefighter. And it's okay to say, yes, I need more clarification because we had several meetings over that topic. So you would, yeah, absolutely.
As a member of the committee, I think we could all use.
So if you want to walk through that, and if you need Chief Davis to also kind of give you real world examples, that's too
Yeah, I'm
fine.
actually going to ask either Taylor or Letitia, and then probably Chief Davis, maybe to give me some support on this. We did spend a lot of time talking through the right language because if you may recall, when we were looking at the original Fitch models, there was a fire civilian model and a fire sworn model, and we've really landed somewhere in the middle. So they will not be civilians, but they will be civil service positions that will be single role and that they only perform EMS work, as opposed to a dual role position that is an EMS or an EMT. They will do EMS work, but they're also certified firefighters.
Yeah, thank you.
Chief, did I explain that clearly, or kind of what else would you add? Because again, we did have a lot of internal conversation, making sure that we were categorizing this group the right way.
I think Val nailed it.
I'd like to hear the chief talk about why that's important.
So if you think about the way the fire department currently is structured, they operate in a readiness model. There's 45 fire stations across the city that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they are ready to respond, right? And they are dual role providers. They are licensed by the state of Texas, credentialed by the medical director and so forth. They have a Texas Commission on Fire Protection certification to be a structural firefighter. And they also have an emergency medical technician certification or paramedic certification through the State Department of Health and Human Services. So they have two certifications that they have to keep up, continuing education on, they're responsible for, and et cetera. So with that readiness model of 45 fire stations, if you think about the MedStar model in a single role provider, they do not have the structural firefighting certification. They are licensed by the state, credentialed by the medical director in a single role, and that is to be an EMS provider at both the basic, intermediate, and advanced levels, correct? So if you think about taking them in a single role and embedding them on top of the structure of the readiness model, you have a hybrid system that is able to fluctuate with peaks and demands of the day, of the season, of expected anticipated events such as weather or Mayfest, those type of things, and they can balance nicely to work together to meet the demands of the community.
Thanks, Chief. Al, I think you had a question, please.
So, not on this particular topic, but bullet number 3, I would like to understand the discussion about that, since I think there's been past discussion about the medical director office.
Sure. We engaged with, and I'd say engaging with the hospital CEOs, the topic of independent medical direction was raised. It's something that's important to them.
And not just to them, but also to the emergency room physicians and EPAB.
Correct.
Yeah.
And they really touted the work being done by Dr. Jarvis and his team. So they really made sure that was top of mind for us. And then to follow up, we worked with and heard from the Tarrant County Medical Society, who represents a lot of the, who represents the doctors in Tarrant County. Many of them have been involved in EMS work for a long time. They're passionate about the work, and they've been involved through the current Emergency Physicians Advisory Board, the EPAB board, that is currently in place through MedStar. We won't necessarily, we may not call it EPAB, but we will have some type of medical advisory board situated. But in talking with this group, it was important, again, that the clinical and patient care was separated from operations, and to ensure that that was the focus, that patients were getting the best care. They were doing research to ensure that they were doing best care, but it was really their sole mission to look at that. I'd say that was probably the main basis of the conversation. Additionally, having a role in the hiring and selection of a medical director has been important just through past history, and I know that's something that's important to them now to continue on with that. But they also referenced having a medical director, a single medical director, so there's not confusion or the need to coordinate in extra ways if there were dueling medical directors with different opinions. So that was one of the other options or items that they brought to our attention. But really making sure the medical director was independent and had the necessary staff to fulfill their mission.
Thank you, Valerie. I appreciate that.
And additionally, the OMD is really independent of MedStar. It just happens to be housed in the same facility as MedStar, but it's an independent office.
And if there's no other questions at this point, I'd like to have Christiane Simmons come up to talk through some of the fiscal impacts of the EMS recommendations. The Fort Worth Lab has worked closely with our team and with the Fitch team to really ensure that we understood and agreed on numbers and calculations that are going into the analytics that we want to share today.
Yes, thank you.
Click for you, or do you want the clicker?
Yes, thank you, Val. So as mentioned, part of one of the roles of the lab is to ensure that city management and city council has good, reasonable information upon which to make decisions. And so part of ensuring that means that we're often engaging on models that are provided to the city for our use by departments or consultants or research groups. And we, often get tasked with sort of deconstructing and reconstructing those models to ensure that we're working from the right base. And so as the ad hoc committee considered their charge, we were working in the background in collaboration with Fitch, MedStar, the fire department, and others to do just that. So we deconstructed, in some cases reconstructed models to come to our own conclusions and present you with a number. And so we use, of course, the same baseline as Fitch for an apples to apples comparison. So we worked from the optimized version of the contracted model, including the goals around unit hour utilization and response time goals and the staffing that supports those goals. We dove into revenue in the beginning of our work with Fitch, but we didn't end up making any substantive changes. So the revenue assumptions for us were consistent across any of the models that the ad hoc committee considered. We really focused on the expense side and particularly the administrative support functions, sort of looking to apply a Fort Worth lens to Fitch's work around the administrative staffing. And finally, we pulled out the OMD and communications from our analysis and then folded them back in just for transparency. So just want to note that, when we show costs, it does include those functions of OMD and communications. What I'll say is we took a pretty conservative approach to administrative staffing, and when I say conservative here, what I mean is generous or gracious. So we've sort of modeled it as if most of the MedStar administrative complement would come over to the city. We didn't assume a lot of augmenting with existing civilian staff. And I say that because we're trying to be conservative in the costs that we're showing. We would think that as we begin our next phase of work with HR, legal, IT, FMS, some of the other internal service departments, potentially you could see that 76 number go down. But we've tried to show sort of what we think at the max, what the operations and administrative staff would look like. So you see revenue from transport and non-transport revenue there, 54.6 million, and the expense side between the operations staff, administrative staff, and all the operating and maintenance, 65.5 million for a cost to cover in the budget of about $10.9 million, 10.887. Which you heard referenced in an earlier presentation today, budget work session. So that's where that number comes from.
And Christiane, I would just underscore what you shared, that this number is really our high ceiling number. And working with the Fitch team and coming up with this information, it does not account for potential efficiencies that we may find as we're working to get the transition completed. So we do think this is a higher ceiling number. And it doesn't account for some efficiencies and other things that we may find as we work through this.
Yes, that's right. We tried to be generous and careful in our analyses. And so we'll move forward and continue to sort of scrub that administrative number. And then we've just included some specific follow-up questions that we received along the way from the ad hoc committee. So for example, we were asked, how does the model compared to what MedStar EMTs and paramedics get paid today? So this table sort of shows you that comparison. The MedStar figures you see here for EMT and paramedic pay are using an annual average in their fiscal year 24 budget for those hourly rates. And then you'll see what we've built into the that single role model that Val described. So 2320 and 3577 respectively. We use an average market rate plus 10% for our modeling. And so this doesn't mean that this is, exactly what they're going to be paid, but that's what the model is built upon. And then we were also asked, what do the dual role firefighters today who are EMTs and paramedics, how are they incentivized? And so we've just shown that here for an example. Of course, when you talk about a single role, you probably, you wouldn't maybe see that incentive pay because it'll be built into their rate, but that was just a point of information that we shared with the ad hoc committee. We also looked at health insurance to see if there were, vast differences in the different models. And when we were talking about the MedStar employees or, new employees coming over as general employees, there was really no additional impact as far as the health insurance goes. With these employees perhaps getting represented by the 440 plan, what we budget on the city side for the employer contribution is the same, whether it's a 440 plan employee or a general employee. And of course, employees then make their own insurance selections, and so their employee contribution might change. But as far as the models go, those were pretty apples to apples between, being civil service protected or not. And of course, the ad hoc committee recommended that they should be civil service employees. So this was just a question we sort of explored during the process. And then finally, we tried to work with HR and legal to brainstorm other civil service related costs that will come up. And so already that there's a cost to promotional exams when it comes to civil service methodology and rules. There are trainee exam costs. And then there's sort of this future cost related to collective bargaining, which we don't have a specific figure tied to, but we know there's a cost there. And so that's something we can, sort of continue to explore. And you'll see some other notes there about CE requirements that might be related for civil service EMS, and then questions around pension contributions. We're early in the stages of trying to anticipate what of that 10.9 million we'll actually need for fiscal year 25. We've modeled it as if we'll need the whole thing, but that's probably not exactly reasonable when it comes to transition and implementation time. And so we have sort of a placeholder figured here, but we know there are probably some decision packages coming with regard to the 911 working group. And then we've sort of indicated here are some of the personnel related costs that will begin to arise in fiscal year 25. This year, as you might remember, in the fiscal year 24 adopted budget, we'd budgeted $4.2 million for subsidizing MedStar or giving them assistance month over month or quarterly. We've carried that forward into fiscal year 25 in the target budgets that you've seen in other presentations. We've modeled that 4.2 million coming forward into fiscal year 25, so that can help offset the cost of 10.9 or 7 million, wherever we kind of land based on the timing. So we have a little bit of buffer there. But, we're in the early stages of trying to figure out exactly what we'll need for fiscal year 25 as we're mid-implementation. Any questions about fiscal impact?
I think it's just important to have the conversation when we're talking about fiscal impact. It is a big impact to our budget. It's one that the residents have gone 40 years of EMS service without having to pay for out of our city budget. And so this is a big substantial difference. One that we now take the cost on because it's a service that we have to provide to our residents in the same way that we provide police and fire, and we pay for those. And so the piper has come, and it's time we pay him on this one. And so if you could just, really for the benefit of those that weren't on the committee and everyone listening and paying attention, kind of talk about how MedStar's, the model that we use under MedStar and that fiscal model, it's not just MedStar, but we're seeing it across the country kind of not work, so that people understand that we're not just doing this because we decided one day we didn't like MedStar, or maybe they had a rough year, but it was because we're trying to get out ahead of something.
No, thank you for bringing that up. It has been, I want to say, since I want to say the city paid a subsidy maybe up through the early 90s. I mean, but it's been a long time since we've had to pay for those services. MedStar has been footing that bill. They used reserves and fund balance to do that. And you're right, now it's time that it's going to cost public dollars for this necessary service, and we're here. When we started working with MedStar specifically on some of the funding concerns, we really looked at what was going on nationwide in EMS, and many other EMS agencies are struggling. There are changes in federal government rules and regulations that impact reimbursements and revenues that go to EMS agencies. There have been changes at the state level that have cut down some of those revenue sources. And then additionally, a lot of the work that they have to do now in doing nurse triage and other community service related items don't come with a revenue source. And so it's really identifying a revenue source to pay for some of those services that traditionally haven't had a funding source tied to them.
Any other questions, council? Thank you.
Mayor, I think it might be helpful, we breezed past it, but I think it's helpful in the conversation on the fiscal side to talk about the value side. The goals that we've set for this new system are significantly improved with the 8-minute response time and the 50% utilization. So I think it's important maybe, I know we breezed through that, but that's a really major distinction between the system we're creating and the system that was.
No, I agree. Thank you. Part of working with the committee and working with Fitch was to make sure that we were looking and developing an EMS model that would even exceed what we currently had. In doing that and working with MedStar, we realized that the MedStar EMTs and paramedics were working at a 0.67 unit hour utilization, which is really high. They go from run to run. It's not enough time to do reports. I mean, it's a daily grind that could really wear you out. In working with Fitch and looking at all the potential models, we did base it on a 0.50 unit hour utilization. So there is more of a controlled workload with these models. It's based on an 8-minute travel time. So when we looked at travel times in City of Fort Worth and some of the other member cities, they ranged anywhere, if I can remember correctly, from like 9.5 minutes up through 15 minutes just for the travel time piece. And these models are all based, or this model is based on an 8-minute travel time. So you're already going to see an improved service level. And then we will continue to work on the 911 side to see where we can cut down minutes and time and other pieces of the process. But you're right, the model being proposed does have a 0.50 unit hour utilization, which is going to be better quality of life for those EMTs and medics and folks in the field. But it's also based on the 8-minute travel time, which is an improvement to City of Fort Worth and all of the member city jurisdictions.
Any other questions? That was helpful, Jared. Thank you. You can continue. Thank you.
So next, we're just going to talk quickly through but just kind of high level through transition and implementation timelines. We have engaged with Fitch and Associates to stay on board and serve as our transition manager, having their expertise. They do this in other jurisdictions to help as we coordinate with Chief Davis and Ken Simpson and our teams, HR, to really make sure we're implementing and transitioning the right way. They will be our boots on the ground to help us with that process. We're anticipating a 12 to 18-month timeframe. We think 18 months may be a little long, but we really want to make sure we provide that buffer. We want to do it the right way, and we want to make sure there's some room if we anticipate any unforeseen issues that we need to spend time working through. We wanted to make sure, of course, that we worked with mayor and council, and once these recommendations are vetted through this body, we are prepared to continue working on implementation and transition steps. The implementation includes a communications and strategy plan. Renee, I don't know if you want to speak to this directly, you can, because our communications and public engagements team, along with Cooksey and internal staff, have been working to make sure we're firing on all cylinders from a communication standpoint. Renee, if you want to maybe give a quick overview of the communications plan, I think it's really extensive and meets all of the marks that we need to meet.
So we're just utilizing the platforms that we have available to us to speak to different audiences as they may be interested in specific information, whether it be the employees that are transitioning over, general overview videos for the public to understand, always pushing and asserting the fact that their safety and being able to give them patient-centric care, that's the words, are always going to be made available to them. As far as our messaging to the public, some of that will be some paid advertising as well, in working with our neighborhood associations and pushing those through Nextdoor, as well as the leadership within those neighborhood associations, so that they're comfortable with the transition, what has happened. And here's just an overview of many of the town halls that have been completed with the assistance of the HR department, Valerie, and our engagement group to serve as a facilitator for those that have questions from the MedStar end of things, as well as to the public, and a robust website at the end of the day where everything is being put up on. So from the Fitch reports to the videos that we produce to the news releases we're releasing, somebody could go back in time and follow the entire process if they'd like.
And we're spending a lot of care and attention and working with Chief Davis and Ken to make sure we're really coordinating with the fire teams and the MedStar teams to start looking at them working together and what are some of the things that we need to do as we look culturally at the two organizations and bringing them together. We're going to be working with Hillary Shine, who has assisted with this project, to really jump in and help the chief and Ken really work through some of the cultural changes and trainings that we may need to address. With MedStar, we're getting a diverse workforce, a diverse workforce into the fire department. So we're spending a lot of time making sure that there's no culture shocks. I know, diverse.
You're doing great.
Diverse. But truly, and I appreciate Councilmember Beck has also mentioned this to us in conversations that she's had with EMS and fire folks in the field, that this is something that we need to be conscious of and really be proactive as we make that change. Diverse. Diverse. Some of the high-level implementation items, we have been working with Fitch and Deanna, the Fort Worth Lab, Mark, and others. We have a task list now of about 143 items that have their own subtasks. We can provide that detailed information to mayor and council, so you can see some of the specifics. But some of the items include, working on the board governance, working with the lab to establish budget needs, working with Fitch to really nail down our transition plan once we have finalized recommendations, and then putting the agreements in place that we need to have the service level with the other participating member cities. We also are working to set an implementation date, so this process isn't going to go on forever. We're working to set a date certain that we can plan for as we're communicating. And again, we're also going to continue working with the member cities on cost allocation and asset options, and we'll continue to share that information with mayor and council. We have an interlocal agreement in place now that governs our relationship with MedStar and the other 13 member cities. We've been working closely with Dennis McElroy, Taylor Paris, Letitia, Leanne in the city attorney's office, along with Ken Simpson and his team, to make sure we fully understand how we need to navigate through making changes or dissolving that interlocal. If all member cities are in 100% alignment, it makes it easier for us to navigate and potentially dissolve the current ILA and then set up a service level structure for future agreements. Again, we're working closely with the member cities on trying to get that 100% alignment. It's taken, just a lot of conversations and talking, but we're continuing that, and I think we're hopeful that we can get there. Also on the civil service side, as we shared, from a staff standpoint, we really worked to make sure we were calling this new position the right thing, a single role EMS civil service position. There are some steps that we need to go through in order to implement that. And those steps include making changes to our fire collective bargaining agreement. And some of those changes to that agreement include updating the definition and adding the definition that would define a single role EMS civil service employee. So we need to work with the local 440, the lab, city management to really get that process moving. We've had some initial conversations with the local 440, and we're prepared to approach it using an MOU and memorializing some of this through an MOU agreement versus having to reopen the entire collective bargaining agreement. We've got a pretty tight timeline that I'm sharing, but give us a little grace because it is super tight. But it has us really starting to work together in May, bargaining in June, and really coming back after the summer break with some updates to the collective bargaining agreement that would accommodate this change. And then, excuse me, lastly, as I said, we are going to set up an EMS steering committee structure. We'll work with Mayor Parker and the EMS ad hoc committee members to see how they want to participate in that steering committee, understanding that they've just invested a lot of time and effort into this process so far. And then we'll have other working groups set up, the 911 working group and Office of the Medical Director working group, and the others that are listed here. And I'd say with the working groups, we're already starting to engage. Deanna and her team have already engaged with MedStar and fire employees, so that working group is really getting started. And then we're hoping to get the interfacility transport working group meeting the week of May 20th, so we can get that work started. Our next steps include providing this presentation on the EMS ad hoc committee's recommendations to you today, and then following up with the resolution on the May 21st agenda to memorialize the recommendations and accepting that transition plan, excuse me, that transition plan to move forward. And I think with that, we can take some questions, and I appreciate your time. And again, I think I'm coming down with a horrible cold, so thank you for
As you present.
your patience.
That's not fun. Well, you did a great job. Jared, please.
Yeah, just to continue that thought, Val, as a member of the ad hoc committee, I just want to personally thank you. This was a very heavy task, and it took a lot of legwork, and so I want to first just really thank you for your leadership and keeping us wrangled, if you will. It was a really, really thorough, in-depth, intentional, thoughtful process. And y'all threw a lot of information. As any information we requested, y'all provided like the next day, if not a few days after. And so I really appreciate you also, Chair Flores of the committee, and Mayor Parker for y'all's leadership as well. This was a really heavy lift, but I think we landed somewhere really nicely, and even more importantly for our residents who depend on this care in really tough times. So thank y'all for the hard work and everyone who was involved with this. I really appreciate what y'all did.
Thank you, Jared. Any other questions or comments from council? No. Great job. Thank you. And again, to the committee, to Carlos for chairing as well. Thank you. Okay, council, our next presentation is by Richard Zavala, our Parks and Recreation Director, to give us a briefing on the Gateway Master Plan.
Thank you, Mayor. Richard Zavala, Park and Recreation Department. This has been a year-long process, and there have been a lot of people involved in this, so I'd like to just recognize a few folks. First of all, there has been a great group of interested citizens who have had passion for this. And this is historic to this park because that passion, you'll see in a minute, has existed for over half a century. Our partners, the Tarrant Regional Water District, the Corps, as well as Streams and Valleys, and Stacy Pierce is here with us today. We also, the Park Board was very involved. Ann Stetson from Place 4 is here with us, and I need somebody to pull up the PowerPoint at some point. No, it's not there. While they're pulling that up, I want to thank the city manager's office too, because they have really helped us and pushed us through this process, which I think ends up with a better product with this. Our own staff in the Park and Recreation Department, Dave Lewis, Joel McElhaney, Scott Penn, who's been the project manager on this, and Karen Stumer, thank you. John Fielder from Kimberly Horn, who was the landscape architect firm, and overall, just the interest throughout the community. So trying to set that up while I'm trying to get this going. But let me start with this. A nation behaves well if it leaves its assets in better condition, in improved condition, rather than impaired condition for future generations. And that is apropos for this park. Teddy Roosevelt said that in 1911. And you'll see in a minute why it is apropos, because this has been a sewage treatment plant, a landfill, it's in the floodplain. But we have a great opportunity now to turn what's been impaired into an outstanding asset in the vision that came with that over 50 years ago. When you look at your priorities, the primary one is community investment. But we can touch all of these with it. So let me set the stage of the significance of this master plan in a community, and I'll give it to you from a high level. So if you think about the history of this city, Lake Worth, that was the beginning back in the early 1900s. In 1936, we had a Centennial Exposition. That turned into Will Rogers and the Cultural District. In 1941, we bought Tarrant Field, 500 acres to the west. That was a bomber plant, and it also became a strategic air command base. We know it today is the Joint Reserve Base in Lockheed Martin. Back in the 60s, the Convention Center, built by the county in 2000, we took it over, put $75 million in it, and this last Saturday, it's going to enable us to continue to invest in that community asset. That builds the city. These are long-range policy decisions that pay again and again for multi-generations. From a park system standpoint, over 300 parks, 13,000 acres, but these are really the big four, beginning with the Botanic Garden, which was acquired in 1937, and we're reinvesting in that. Gateway, which we're going to talk about today. In the 60s, the Nature Center came online, and of course, the zoo in the very beginning in 1909 as part of the park system. So I say all that to say this is a significant policy decision for this community when you consider Gateway Park, its size and its potential. Let me just orient you. You can see at the bottom is I-30. On the north is East First Street. To the east is Oakland Boulevard. Almost splitting to the west is Beach Street, running north and south. I'll refer to the Oxbow area west of Beach Street a number of times, but the main park there. It began with 160 acres. It's our only metropolitan park, the only one we have in the system. It's located in Council District 11, but it is a park that serves the entire city, really the entire region, just like those others. And we know through Placer AI that we're getting over 600,000 visits on an annual basis. So here's what it looks like today. Mainly athletic fields. We have over a dozen athletic fields. The improvements that are there, trailheads, mountain bike trails, observation decks, a lot that goes along the river. And really kind of the catalyst of the new generation was Fort Wolf. We put $100,000, built a 5-acre dog park in 2004, and that really began the renaissance of this, and you'll see how it ties together. When you look at the history, over 50 years ago, the Halpern Plan identified this in 2 studies. And right there, you see the beginning of Ruth Carter Stevenson, Phyllis Tilley, and Streams and Valleys, and generations has carried forward. That they saw that vision, and what they were looking at was a sewage treatment plant that had operated for 75 years. A number of plans have occurred over the years, and the ones I'm going to focus on is the 2002 and the 2009 master plan. So in 2002, if you'll look at the map to the west, you'll see the soccer field area, that's the Oxbow area. That is really was called the Phyllis Tilley Plan. It was commissioned by Streams and Valleys upon Phyllis's passing. So it could just continue the legacy here, and it was done by James Toll. But down the middle of the park, you can see there's 100 acres there that's not our property. We've identified that for future potential. The main stem of the park, you can see where the ball fields are down the middle, running north and south. And as you go to the east, you'll see additional ball fields. And at the time, we had a youth golf course, and the first tee was planning on moving out to Gateway Park. There's overlooks, there's trails, a lot there. But this master plan was done because of the beginnings of the discussion of working this part of the Central City Trinity River Vision Plan. We updated in 2009, and this incorporated that Oxbow area to the west. Again, the discussions were going on with the Corps, much bigger project, but this is now going to become part of that. Valley storage was needed. We had to create that in that western area, which was actually owned by the Water District. A lot of it went over to the landfill, which is on the east side of the park. But this plan created an update, again, more. We introduced disc golf, we introduced disc golf and off-road bicycling, working with a lot of volunteer groups. But this is the plan that we're setting now. And then as a change came with the Trinity River Vision, it gave us the opportunity to really activate the park. So we began the conversations with the Corps in 2008. We updated the plan in 2009. You can see the record of decision in 2015. That was the huge game breaker there that incorporated it all as to the Trinity River Vision. Immediately went in and entered into agreement with the Water District for that Oxbow area, which is about 135 acres. And in 2018, we finally eliminated the last of the Riverside sewage treatment plant out of the footprint of the park. Immediately, the voters approved $8 million in bond funds in the 22 bond program. To understand the site, 70% of it is either in the floodway or in the 100-year floodplain. The floodway is in the brown, the 100-year flood is in the blue, the 500-year flood is in the yellow. And you can see right in the middle of the park, that was the beginning. Those are the the softball fields that exist today. But we did trails all along the other areas. So when you look at it, there's about 250 acres that are outside the floodway in the 100-year flood, and about half of that, or a little more than half of that, is the landfill to the east, which was actually a gift from Amon Carter and Ruth Carter Stevenson. So there is limitations here, but you know, half the park system is in the floodplain. So that's okay, and we can definitely work with that. So what's happened in the last 20 years? And I mentioned Fort Wolf, that seemed to be the kicker that we got things going with that dog park, but synthetic fields were put in on the soccer fields. The reason those are there is because there were PCBs, contamination in the park. And we worked with the EPA and TCEQ, and we were able to build fields that would encapsulate that. Gets inspected annually, but it was the beginning of taking back that property. You can see to the south end of the picture on the left, those were the digesters. That was a Riverside treatment plant that operated for 75 years. That's a $7.7 million cleanup, and that was done in 2018. Game changer, total game changer. Now we're in with the park, because now all that has been removed. Over time, we've done $22 million worth of improvements since 2004. About $6 million of that was done up until 2009. Since then, roadways, we got a state grant. We got soccer fields that were built that encapsulated the PCBs. That was a $4.3 million project. A lot of improvements have occurred in this park during that time, but as you can see, that clean site, now it's totally ours, and it is no longer impaired. It is improved, and that's what we're going to be able to expand on the park. So here are the numbers, the 22 bond program, also the Water District with funding from the Tax Increment Financing District will generate $14.6 million. That'll be our first phase. You can see the breakdown of that, about an 80-20 split for design and construction. So let me shift to the master planning process, and it was pretty extensive. We've been involved in it over a year. We engaged Kimberly Horn, and we had a number of meetings with the intent of getting an update, educating, and I can just tell you, every meeting, the passion, every email that followed every meeting, everything that happened was, this is a park that we want to make our central park in the city of Fort Worth. And you know what? They're exactly right. They're exactly right. That's what it is for us. This shows you the planning timeline. We had a stakeholder group that involved Tarrant Regional Water District, the Corps of Engineers, Streams and Valleys, our own Fort Worth lab with the Central City Project. They met, helped us with regulatory questions, things like that. We had 3 public meetings over a span of time. Average attendance was about 50, which is good for those types of meetings. Each one was followed by a survey. We received over 300 surveys, about 100 per meeting. People would react. People would react to what they heard, and then the consultant, Kimberly Horn, would take that in. We've been to the park board 3 times. We went to them as a briefing last October, and then in February as an information item. As they do on these big policy decisions, they'll hear it one month, they'll come back the next month. They took action in March, and here we are today. Again, this just shows you the meetings and the layouts, and we appreciate Councilmember Martinez being at the meetings, and in particular the last one at Victory Forest that was well attended. So these are the planning areas. This is a planning thing. It's a landscape architect thing. So it breaks out the park in certain areas. So if you begin to the far right, which is the landfill area, you can see that's up high. Then you've got the river running down the middle where your sports and athletics are going to go. Other facilities, again, remember, there's only about 100 acres here that are outside of the floodplain. The community hub, you'll see it in a minute. Lots of activity and development occurring there. And then as you get to Beach Street and to the west, that would be the Oxbow area. That would be the record of decision, the valley storage, the soil that was taken over to the landfill, and it opened up this whole area of the park. So I need to thank Cameron Gorman, who's not here with us, the wizard of all videos, and Karen Stumer on our staff. This video that you're about to see will give you an overview. A couple of things. One, it shows a total project build-out of $170 million. $140 million of that is the estimate, but we're also projecting that there'll be public-private partnerships. So about 15 to 20% of the development of the park. The other thing is you're going to see numbers and visitations. The consultant has looked at those, provided us by facility, over a dozen facilities, what we anticipated, the annual attendance that it'll create, and you'll see in a minute, it's over 200 million people, or 2 million people that would be coming to the park. We got all that off of Placer II. So if you go to Gateway, we're going to know where you came from, where you went after you left. A lot of people go to Whataburger. I don't know why, but that's in there. But we know where people are coming home, work, the demographics of the folks and everything else. So great intel for us in this design. So if I can work this video, and I can't, backwards. Karen Stumer, I know you're here. What do I do next? Click it. I did. Got it?
Technical difficulties.
My apologies. Apologies. It worked every time. Yes, but it should click and then give me a video. Right click. I'll take anything I can get.
So has Karen left you hanging? Is she in the room?
Joseph, can you help?
Okay. So far, Richard, your presentation is fabulous.
YouTube? It's not on YouTube.
Yeah, there's no link for it to play embedded in there.
Okay, resend it.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know how to do it.
Well,
You know, I was going to drop a trophy, and then I was going to say divorce.
Oh.
But instead, I thought this would be better.
Have faith, Richard. If Joseph can't fix it, you'll just have to sing.
Yeah, I know it. And let me tell you, it's 1 minute, 24 seconds.
Okay.
And the staff really put together a miracle, and we're going to expand on this and be able to continue to keep the excitement around the park.
Did anybody pick this for their daily trifecta?
Got it?
And Richard, while he's working, how does this compare to New York?
Well, you'll see it in the video.
Okay.
I knew you were going to ask that question.
Thank you.
All right, sound.
Alan, can I see you for a minute?
Yeah, run it. Sound.
All right.
All right, worth the wait, I hope. All right, now how to get out of here?
Worth the wait.
Get back on.
Richard,
So
do we know how many miles of hike and bike trails we're planning on having?
in total, no. But we can get that information to you. How many? There are more bike trails, there are boardwalks. I'll go over that here in a minute. More athletic fields, and all those numbers are in the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Good, thank you, Joseph. All right, so everybody cover your left eye and read me the list that's up there. So I want to give you the whole thing, and I want to begin from the east and work my way to the west. You'll see over by the landfill area, observation deck, but in that tiny corner, there's a destination playground, like Dream Park at Trinity Park, a splash pad, restrooms. We're going to activate that site. And then we're going to protect the landfill, but also use it for the beautiful views that you get downtown. Down the middle spine is the river, so that's fairly limited, but that'll be trails. And we have disc golf and the mountain bikers working through there. The middle is the athletic fields that run up through the spine. We also have, in the future, an amphitheater, a service center that will need to go in there because we're going to have to dedicate staff as we begin to make improvements. And then down the middle of the park is really the active area. This is where we're going to put the most investment of expanding the event space, the great lawn. This will be the gathering space of the park. And then as you go to the west across Beach Street, that's the Oxbow, and that's where the focus of this is going to be. This just gives you a list. Maybe if you uncover your eye, you can see this one. But again, every element is in there. I had somebody earlier ask me, "You going to have pickleball?" Yes, we're going to have pickleball. Outdoor basketball courts, we don't have that there. Those types of things. Skate park is not there, but so much can happen in this site. And now I'm going to focus on the Oxbow area, which is the area that we're going to concentrate on with the funding that we have. Beginning with an entryway that will be a cross entryway on your far right, which is at number 9, connecting the park on both the east and west side. A lot of roadway infrastructure going in, but athletic fields, again, if you'll remember the legacy of that Tilly plan, sand volleyball courts, tennis courts, pickleball courts, basketball courts. We even have an interpretive trail and an outdoor classroom and ropes course through that area. Again, this is in the floodway, but nonetheless, most of the time we'll be able to utilize it. So with that, here's our schedule going forward. We would ask that we come to you with an M&C to adopt this plan in June. At the same time, we would bring forward the design and engineering agreement on that same date. And if you remember my last presentation, time is money, so we want to keep moving on this. Overall, it'll take some time to design, and we have to deal with a number of core and floodway issues. So it is an extended period of time, but we would hope to begin construction at the beginning of 2026 and have the park completed about 15 months later with a full reopening by the late spring or summer of 2027. So with that, sorry about the video, but I'll be happy to take any questions. And again, we have a lot of folks here that have been very supportive of this throughout the project.
Any questions of Richard? Jeanette?
No questions, just comments. Thank you, Richard. Thank you to Parks and Rec, to your entire team for all their hard work that has gone into this. And I hope I'm still around during the construction, when construction begins. But just shameless plug, I really believe that we need a pool in our only metropolitan park. So that's it.
I heard that loud and clear, Richard. I hope you did.
Yes, ma'am.
As Chris would say, Jeanette, if you hope you're going to be here, Chris would tell you to run your race. Any other questions of Richard? I do want to acknowledge Stacy Pierce being in the audience with us. Thank you for your partnership. And Richard, I guess we'll see you on June 11th. Richard, okay?
Thank you.
Next, moving on, we're going to move to number 8. David Cook is going to give us an overview of our capital projects under consideration in the excess funds from FY23. Take it away, David.
I was on the other side earlier. Now you guys look different.
You're at the good camera, so be good.
Let's see. All right. Oh, there we go. All right. My job here is to talk about a couple things. One is we have capital projects in motion from different bond programs and projects that aren't bond funded that I think everybody knows over the last couple of years with inflation, supply shortages, all that, we have some gaps in capital projects. So what I'm going to talk about is how we're going to try to keep those projects going and how we're going to identify some funding to do that. I won't go into a lot of this. You've seen it before. Inflation, materials, labor, all have pushed some of these projects up in the cost standpoint. And again, what I want to do is identify the funding shortfalls by areas and projects. But we're also at the point, Reggie, I need you to know, is just a relentless guy. So when we're talking about ARPA money, does everybody remember that we have to commit it by the end of December 2024 and spend it by the end of December 2026? Reggie does not want to send any money back to Washington, D.C., right? Not one penny. So he is relentless on staff to make sure that we commit by 24, spend by 26. So one of the ways, one of our strategies to address capital projects is going to be to shift ARPA funds to existing capital projects that qualify and take other funding to backstop what we have previously dedicated to ARPA. Does everybody get that? So this is it's a two-pronged strategy. Let's make sure we spend ARPA, and let's see what we can do to hit some of these capital project needs, okay? The other thing before we get into the details is, this is another thing we stress. Every capital project has a scope, a schedule, and a budget, right? And so when you looked at bond projects from 18 or 22, or even before that, 2014, every project had a scope, every project had a schedule, and everyone had a budget. We get into trouble when we change scope or schedule. right? So if the schedule takes longer, costs go up. If we do things to a project that affect the scope, sometimes that makes a project go up in cost. So we're very particular in looking at scope, schedule, and budget. And some of these things we'll look at, why didn't we change the scope down, right? So that's always a choice. If we're limited in money, we could change the scope of a project down. In most of these cases, we're keeping the scope the same because we believe that was a commitment we made, whether it was an 18 bond program, a bond project, or a 22 bond project. But we look at scope, schedule, and then the budget. The other thing that we've done before we get to this stage, so we don't just come and say we have a gap, we need to take money and do it. We look at any other available capital funding source, whether it's prior bonds, whether it's the sale of property, it could be impact fees or park dedication, gas well revenue, you get the idea. And we came to you back, I think it was in January or February, and said we are going to have some savings from prior fiscal year spending and revenue that we set aside for capital projects. So in a lot of ways, that's really our last source when we've exhausted the other options. So here's what we know right now. And these are projects that were in prior bond programs, as well as capital projects that have been a part of an approved capital improvement plan. And this is what we've identified, projects that are currently in motion that will be, the way I think about it, when we're going to bring an M&C to you in the next 12 to 18 months, we need to have identified how that project's going to be funded, right? So these are projects that are coming to you in the next, some of these will be in the next few months, but really when the frame of reference is the next 12, 18 months. Mostly driven on the transportation side. But here are the other areas that we have identified current gaps in funding. Here's what we need. Here is what we have at this point in time that we'll be allocating some of these funds to address some of those capital needs. So the first line there you see is we have at least $28 million from prior transportation bond programs, right? So our recommendation will be that we're going to use 28 million of those savings from prior bonds for transportation to current needs for transportation. Everybody got that part? We sold the downtown library, so we have the sale of the library that we're going to recommend to use right now for library projects, but the council could change how we use the sale of that property as well.
David, if I can interrupt, please.
Yes.
Okay. So when we sold the downtown library,
yes,
there was a commitment made to our residents that a portion of that sale would go to fund a new downtown library.
Yeah, we're not messing with that.
Okay. So that $15 million does not touch the money that we set aside for the new downtown library?
I'm gonna get to that in just a minute. So what I want to touch on is where we know we have money.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about the library needs in a minute.
Okay. Thank you.
Because we have a library need here of 3.4. Yeah. That's not a downtown library, but we'll get to that.
That's the one I'm most concerned with.
So we've got prior bond money. We've got the sale of the downtown library. You recently approved the tax notes for 2024. And then, as we shared with you in, I think it was January or February, we have $38 million from the general fund balance in excess of the amount we needed to hit our goals. Okay. We put the ARPA slash there because we're gonna move some of the general fund money to ARPA so we can free ARPA money for capital projects. That's why that is shown on the same line. So we know what we need, we know the money we have right now, and now how do we recommend matching some of that up? The 28 million from prior transportation bonds would be dedicated to Cromwell Marine Creek, which is a 2022 bond project, if I remember, and Golden Triangle Boulevard. So this will address the gaps from those two projects. We're recommending taking part of the money from that library sale for the far northwest library, which will be 3.4 million short. That will still leave 12.5 million for other library needs.
Other library needs are specifically a downtown library need.
Well, that could be a policy choice. We haven't dedicated to a specific use yet.
Okay.
Okay. So it goes, the balance would be undirected.
Okay, well, we should then direct it to a downtown library, which could potentially cost more than $12 million, knowing what we know now. So I'm all for funding our libraries and shifting stuff around to make sure that we're covering our obligations, and that we're taking care of all of the city's needs. But this council made a decision based on some information. I won't even say it wasn't good information, but just on some assumptions that we would be able to find a building rather quickly and operate a downtown library again. And we can't, and it's becoming increasingly more difficult for us to do so, and cost of land is not decreasing. And so my concern in letting any of that money from the sale of the library go is that we will then turn around and not have the funds to have a downtown library. So how do we assure me and the residents that I represent downtown and throughout the city that have been pretty upset about that situation, that they're still going to have money for a downtown library?
How about if I go through the whole thing? Because what will be left unallocated is the 12.5. But we're going to have a list at the end of projects that are still in need of future funding that we either have to really decide either through a budgeting process, either through the 2026 bond program, or I'm trying to figure out what other options are, right? If we decide we want to just keep the full 15.9 million from the downtown sale, then this would simply have to come out of another source of funding, right, and keep that available, which is an option as well. And then we had 2.7 million identified in the tax notes for the Northwest Police Patrol. The Northwest Police Patrol will be, it's about 5.5 million over budget, and this will be coming to CCPD, or the Crime Control and Prevention District, to make up the other half of that increase. So half of it from the tax notes, half of it from CCPD. Now let's get into the ARPA fund balance swap. We have two projects that we're worried about the timing of whether we can spend it by the end of '26. One is Evans and Rosedale project, which we identified 4.2 million from ARPA, and the Texas A&M Innovation Hub downtown, which we allocated 2.2 million from ARPA. So what we're recommending is to take the general fund balance, move to that money to the equal amount to Evans and Rosedale, right? This actually will give us more flexibility on that project as well, because it'll be all general fund money. It will not be ARPA money. And we'll do the same thing with the Texas A&M innovation money. We'll move general fund balance number to that project. Again, will give us more flexibility as well, and we're not held to a timetable on the money. Does that first part make sense? There's two projects previously funded by ARPA. We're going to recommend funding it through the general fund balance, and then we're going to take that combined amount of 6.5 million and do these ARPA qualified transportation capital projects that we know we can get done by the end of December 26. Does that make sense? So it's an ARPA general fund balance swap. We think it makes it better for both the A&M project and the Evans and Rosedale project, and it frees up money so we can do these qualified transportation projects.
Dave, I have one question.
Yeah.
With the swapping of the general funds, is that going to be for fiscal 25 or until it's actually complete?
So if we move general fund balance money to Evans and Rosedale, there is no timetable in when that money has to be spent, right? So it'll be at the pace we need to go to do Evans and Rosedale the right way. Am I saying that hopefully, helpfully?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, David, but I'll let everybody else put their questions out there and I'll go last. I'm looking at the qualified funds and they seem to be north side heavy. You know, I see Basswood, North Beach, Western Center. Is there any way you could show greater diversity, geographic diversity, in identifying other qualified projects?
Yeah, I think we were going off most of these have to do with pedestrian safety, if I remember. And when I look at the list, I think there are mostly pedestrian safety intersection improvement projects that we went off of the needs that TPW has in motion right now. So part of this is a timeliness issue. Part of it was what qualifies as an ARPA project. The other one, the Meadowbrook Golf Course, I think is the only non-transportation project in that list.
I think we're asking the citizens to trust us to move this money around. But in some cases, especially the downtown library, we may not have that earned trust, because I hear quite a bit of feedback from that, and it's not even my district. I hear it at the beauty salon on Hewlin. And that's why I'm thinking if you're able to show greater geographic diversity, you can see everybody giving in some on this. I would think we want to look at that, because this moving around, it's too north-centered. And so I'd like to know what other projects would be qualified. And we also need to have some type of language that promises the public, we know we're moving this money around, but we're going to commit to doing what we told you. And I'm not hearing that. I'm seeing Carlos taking screenshots, which makes me think this information is new to him. Based on the feedback I hear from Beck, I can tell it's new to her. And so we might need to just kind of flush this some more. Carlos.
Well, Gina, to your point, I can talk specifically with, or to the Long Avenue Pedestrian Safety Project, because that Long has, if you'll excuse the pun, Long reported a lot of crashes along that roadway, east and west. I get a lot of complaints about that. Even running into newly planted trees, on the grassy median. So the intersection, which is a very skewed intersection, has a really terrible line of sight, has been redone. And that's part of that project. It just needs more to complete. When you go to Basswood Boulevard and Old Santa Fe Trail, From the last bond program, we got some partial funding for that, and the rest came from development services money. The reason there, because a lot of motorists were taking U-turns that they shouldn't do, and there were plenty of accidents. We have video of cars tumbling right in front of the entrance of those communities there. So what added cost to that, because again, that was already funded, but now supply chain issues, manufacturing slowdowns are coming into play. The scope of the project increased too because there were drainage improvements that needed to be made. So all this stuff was committed to it, and again, I'm speaking about Long Avenue and Basswood. It just needed more money to complete, because as it stands right now, they can't finish it.
Yeah, I go to the mall all the time at Basswood, so oh yeah, I work out that way.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Gina, Mayor Pro Tem alluded. It is very, nothing against our council members up north, but it is very north heavy. And my concern is I would like to see that list, and I think this goes back to the original question and concern that this city council had in the budgeting process of staff picking and choosing what they want to do with the funds versus giving us a holistic list and letting us decide on what matters and important to our constituents. Because I can rattle off a few streets right now: Rosinger Road, McPherson, Oak Road, that Edmond Parkway, the sidewalk, pedestrian walk for our kids' safety from Ray Street to Forest Hill, and the list goes on and on. And so, I think when you want to, I understand moving the money, I get that part, but when you give us a list that don't represent where we're moving money from, it just smells a little fishy. That's my comments.
Alan?
So I want to echo Carlos's comments for the two projects that are in my district. Well, the three, all of these were things that have been previously committed, but due to issues, they haven't been, they can't fund full completion. So I really don't want to see us go back on prior commitments.
And I'm not advocating that. I'm just curious as to if there are other committed to projects that are not reflected here. I think we need to see the whole list of opportunities.
So let me suggest, because we're not making decisions today.
Okay.
Right? So part of this is to get information out there. I'm going to show you a list of projects in a minute that will still need gap financing. If it's not on that list, it could be that it is already funded at the level it needs to be, but you don't have that in front of you. So I think what we should do is talk about the projects that we know that are funded without needing additional money, right? That's not in front of you. Here's the projects that we need money in the next 12 to 18 months, right? And then you're gonna see a list in a minute and there's these other projects that aren't gonna be awarded in the next 12 to 18 months, but we already know need money. Because I do think, just like you are saying, our commitments are important, right? And when we make a commitment in a bond program, it's our intent to try to meet all those, right? And so we've got to still come back with more strategies that you'll see in a minute. So, and other than the ARPA, we can slow down some of these projects. Slowing down, though, might drive up some of the cost. And so we could be very deliberate, thoughtful, and we don't have to commit all the money today. Our reason of coming before you is some of these projects need to start moving forward. Here's our recommended way of doing some of them, right? But we don't have to tackle it all in the short term. We're just giving you a picture, and I think it'll be helpful if we can give you more information. Yeah. Funded moving forward without additional money, you don't have that list. We can provide that. And what we're talking about today, and then the third list that I mentioned.
And David, just to be clear, it's not advocating to remove any of those. It's just asking for the list of what else is qualified, yes, so that we have the full picture of what is qualified for ARPA funding. I call it COVID money. So I don't want people in Allen's or Carlos's district to think anybody is trying to say, don't do that. We just need the whole picture.
Sure.
Because sometimes staff doesn't get the community feedback that the elected officials get.
Correct. And I do think we need to provide more information to provide that fuller picture. Going back, we identified these uses at this point in time for that general fund balance / ARPA swap. Again, some of that going to transportation projects, some of that going to fire stations. We have 3 fire stations that'll be coming forward in the very near future that are all needing additional funding. And then I mentioned that ARPA swap, which is 2 projects primarily. It's the Texas A&M and then the Evans and Rosedale. We didn't allocate all the fund balance because there's some of the questions that have come up right now, as well as there's still going to be projects a little bit farther out, but then need additional funding. Which takes me to this slide. When you look at a list of projects, anything in that's a Texas A&M type of color is a bond project, right? And then the last few there are non-bond projects, but they're other capital projects in need of funding. That just gives you an idea. That includes fire station, community center, Stop 6 hub, neighborhood streets, and some other of the arterials that were in the 2022, those are primarily 2022 bond program. What we'll do is amend this next step slide because I want everybody to feel comfortable with how we're allocating the money. There are some changes that we'll be bringing, I think, our next presentation is on ARPA because we're, as I mentioned, that Reggie guy's on us to make sure that we're allocating by 24, committing by 24, and then spending by 26. But we can bring back that additional information that I think will help the conversation on how we allocate funds and how we meet all our commitments that we made in the 2018 bond program primarily and the 2022 bond program.
And David, I would encourage staff to meet with Councilmember Beck prior to, that way she has a level of comfort and things will be good.
Yep.
Any other questions of David? Thank you, David, and thank you for staff not wanting to send any money back. We do not send money back. They don't know how to spend it, we do. And so now we'll hear from that man who puts a tight grip on the money, Mr. Reginald Zeno, again, talking ARPA. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. This should be a pretty brief presentation on ARPA. I think David addressed most of the issues in this presentation, but we'll go through it. And as the manager indicated, we're continually reviewing the various projects that are funded through the ARPA allocation to determine any residual amounts that could be available for reprioritization. And we're in the midst of doing just that. We've identified several projects. Mr. Cook just listed those out that would be utilized due to the reallocation of the 2 projects that were referenced that have been moved to the general fund committed fund balance. And as indicated, ARPA funding must be obligated, must be actually contracted by the end of the current calendar year and fully expended by the end of 26. Generally, just a brief overview, the city received $173.7 million. Within that, the city qualified for $86.7 million of the revenue recovery category, and included within that category would be the provision of any government service that could be utilized, that would be utilized and initiated utilizing these resources it's the most flexible category within the ARPA allocation. And then, of course, the non-recovery category, which is the remaining amounts, 87 million. There's specific federal guidance on the use of that pool, primarily public health related, the negative impacts, economic impacts of COVID, and then any very particular, very specific infrastructure projects. The revenue recovery category, we've listed the various projects that we've allocated the monies toward. We've indicated in the columnar analysis here the remaining amounts to be obligated. We've highlighted those projects that we are either transferring to the non-revenue category to free up more flexible revenue recovery dollars, or transferred back over to be funded from the fund balance. The only item really of note would be the capital projects, restorations within public events. There's still approximately $6 million to be obligated or contracted by the end of this year. We did recategorize the forward housing solutions allocation of 1.6 million, and we've moved that item from the recovery category to the non-revenue, to the revenue recovery category to the non-revenue recovery category, because it does qualify within that program. And as indicated, it does provide some flexibility in the use of that 1.6 million. Here's a summary of the available resources, approximately 3.9 million. And here we're showing the transfer of that housing solution to non-revenue, and then the transfer of Texas A&M Innovation Hub allocation to the committed fund balance. Here's a brief analysis of how we are recommending to utilize that 3.9 million, the Meadowbrook Golf Course maintenance building, the CFA Intermodal Parkway partial funding of the 1.3, and then an allocation for the North Beach Street, Western Center Boulevard intersection improvements, which would exhaust the resources available within the revenue recovery category. The next slide provides the various programs that are designated within the non-revenue category. And we've highlighted those that we are using a portion or exhausting the balance of the amounts that are remaining to be obligated. And the item of note, I guess, would be the TPW solar streetlights. I think there was a presentation at the previous work session, and utilizing that 10.5 million prior to the end of the calendar year. There are some amounts to be obligated for various other projects, as child care associates. There's still 4.6 million to be obligated. And then also for permanent supportive housing, 3 million that's yet to be allocated. The broadband infrastructure project is pending, and I'm told that 4.5 million should be obligated pretty soon. So therefore, there are resources still available, unobligated, but there are plans to have most of these resources in place so that the city doesn't lose any of these resources. The summary of available resources, approximately 3.8 million within the non-revenue category. And then the listing of the recommendations and utilizing the 3.8 million and the projects Mr. Cook just referenced and discussed. And here we have now allocated the full amount of the non-revenue recovery category. And all of these projects are shovel-ready, and we've been told by the various project managers that they would be able to have the funds committed by the end of the current calendar year. And just finally, we're continuing to evaluate projects with department leaders and project managers to identify any potential additional residual revenue. We'll be taking a pretty thorough look at the various programs at June 30th. And if-
Reggie, let me interrupt you. When you talk about working with department leaders and project managers, please include city council members in that equation.
Sure.
Conversation.
Sure, absolutely. But of course, we're still concerned about the various projects. There are significant dollars that are still yet to be encumbered or contracted with. And so we're taking a very active approach with the project leaders. And we're spending a significant amount of time with the various departments with that. And then finally, we'll continue to work with the project managers to fully obligate ARPA funding by the end of the calendar year. And if there are any additional residual revenues that are identified, we will certainly be back to council in the August timeframe. We'll be getting it pretty close to the timeline, but we would be coming back to council with any further reallocations if necessary.
I only have one question, David or Reginald. Do we see removal of cast iron pipes be eligible for this money? Since we're going to be removing hundreds of miles of cast iron pipes.
Kate Perry is shaking her head yes, but we would have to certainly take a look at it. But I think offhand she's indicating it would be an eligible use.
Okay. Not recommending, just asking, because I know
Sure.
that's a real problem.
Sure. Kate Perry is our expert.
It falls under the Clean Water and Drinking Water Acts, so the
Gotcha.
cast iron pipes would be eligible.
Okay.
Whatever that was, I still think y'all told me, yeah, okay.
Yes, we are. We are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, the superstar of the entire month so far, Ms. Christiane Simmons, talking about my friends, that being the over 65 and disabled category as we talk about property tax. Make me happy, Christiane.
I'm going to make you happy by introducing Brady Kirk.
That'll work.
Yes, thank you. So you'll recall that last week we came to you with a briefing on a potential exemption for childcare facility providers. And so as another related topic, today Brady's going to walk you through an analysis of what it would take and what the fiscal impact would be to increase again the over 65 and disabled property tax exemption. And so again, Brady Kirk is a budget manager in the Fort Worth Lab who specializes in revenue. So Brady, take it away.
Thank you and good afternoon. I agree, Christiane is a superstar. I hope maybe you might be able to make some room on the all-rookie team for me, since you've heard from me twice today now. Now, last year, the city council made the decision that they were going to give some tax relief to our over 65 and disabled person residents. Now, on the table this year are two different changes to our tax exemptions we're considering. One of those is the childcare provider exemption, and you heard about that a couple weeks ago. What I'm going to walk you through today is what it might cost if we were to give a similar increase to the over 65 and disabled person exemption. This is a quick history of what the exemption has looked like in Fort Worth. So in the 1980s, for whatever reason, there was not a long-lived, but a strong interest in increasing the tax relief for over 65 residents in Fort Worth. So that went up by 1984 to $40,000, and about 7 years later, it followed increasing the disabled person exemptions so that the two matched at $40,000. Then for about 3 decades, not much was done on those until, once again, last year, we took that up from $40,000 to $60,000. And if you just take a quick look at the city of Fort Worth's tax rate and the exemptions that it's offering compared to the other top 10 cities in Texas, you could probably say Fort Worth is roughly average, or at least close to the median on both the tax rate and the exemptions that we're offering to those residents. Now, I think by the end of the presentation, you might see a number that will surprise you a little bit about what the total cost of increasing the exemption by another $20,000 would be. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the two different benefits that Fort Worth offers to over 65 and disabled person residents and how those two affect each other. So there is, on one hand, that $60,000 exemption, but Fort Worth also, which is not, this is something that cities in Texas can elect, Fort Worth offers the local freeze or tax ceiling for over 65 and disabled person. So when you look at your bill and you've got your exemptions and you've got your freeze and your ceiling, whatever that ceiling is, it's not going to mean that you can't pay less than that, but you won't pay more. So that has the final word on the matter. And really in the long term, if that exemption stays steady, then that freeze has a lot bigger impact for you as long as your house is going up in value over time. So this is a look at the entire tax process from the point where the appraisal district initially recognizes the market value of your house to where they've calculated your bill at the end. So here I'm highlighting both the portion where they look at exemptions and then where they compare that to your frozen bill. And that just shows you that that frozen bill will override all those other stages if it's lower than what's calculated. Taking the same property tax process, which goes from market value, homestead, exemptions, this time what's highlighted is everything in the process that the city has some control over as a governing body. So we're talking today about exemptions. We'll be talking all spring and summer, I know, about the tax rate. And then, like I said, we have elected that we have that tax ceiling at the local level. And just in case this could confuse you, sometimes people think that the tax ceiling is only for the school district. So by default, there's some tax ceiling in play for the school district statewide. But at the local level, you elect that. So I'm going to take you through an example now just to illustrate this concept more concretely. Now, we're not talking about a specific house or any individual property in Fort Worth, but it's kind of a typical one I want you to consider. It starts out $250,000 in value, and then it grows over time. And throughout the process, in years 5 and 6, there are a couple of increases in the exemption. So first, we're looking at a case in which the taxpayer is 63 years old to start out, and then in year 3, they're qualifying for that local freeze. So they turn 65, they get the $40,000 exemption for the first time, but they also have their tax bill frozen at $1,515. So as time goes on, in year 4, the exemption is the same, but their tax bill, even though their house has gone up in value, that's the same too, because they've hit the ceiling. Then when we get into years 5 and 6, when the exemption is going up, they do get some value out of that exemption. And all of this is tax relief to this particular homeowner, because if they didn't have the freeze or the exemption, by the end of this period, year 8, they'd be paying over $2,000. So when you talk about the tax relief, some of it is from the ceiling and some of it's from the exemption. And in this particular case, they do get value from the exemption. It's just that by year 8, their house has continued rising in value. Now they're just back at that ceiling. So they're paying that $1,515 again. If we look at a different example though, consider another person who is a couple years older. So this person, even though they've got a house worth the same amount, they've got the same exemptions, they've got the same growth, they hit that ceiling in year 1. And now their tax bill is frozen at $1,412. And I know it's a lot of numbers here, but by the time we get to where the exemption is increasing in year 5, they're still just paying their ceiling because now their home value has increased enough that $20,000 does not get them below that. And this is, I didn't plan for the numbers to work out like this, but when we increase it again, then it goes up to 80. They get $1 off their tax bill, and then the next year, their home goes up in value again, and they're paying the ceiling. So just like in the other case, this person is also getting a lot of tax relief, but in this case, it's all coming from the ceiling, except for that $1 that came from the exemption. And then one last kind of conceptual item about this is something that it took me a little bit to wrap my head around is when I think about what these exemptions cost the city and the tax rolls are going up by X percentage over time, at first I was expecting the cost of the exemption to go up by that amount, but that's not really the case because it's a flat amount per property. It's more just about the number of accounts getting these exemptions, and that's not rising at a super fast rate. And then on the next couple of slides, you'll see the number $134.50. That's not a random number. That's just the maximum amount from a $20,000 exemption that a taxpayer could realize based on our current tax rate. So we took the April tax rolls, all of our accounts with Tarrant Appraisal District, and we looked at what another $20,000 on the over 65 and disabled person exemption would do for these residents. So the total tax relief offered across about 49,000 accounts comes out to $940,000. So that's the cost to the city that's lost revenue if we were to increase that exemption. You've got, if we did not increase it, about 8,000 accounts that would have a zero tax bill from the city. Maybe not necessarily a zero tax bill overall, but to the city they would have to pay nothing. And then after that increase, that number goes up to about 9,300. So that's 1,400 more accounts that, at least for 1 year, would have no City of Fort Worth property tax bill. So we've also broken it out based on how much tax relief some different groups would get. So I would say this distribution, it's really characterized both at the high end and at the low end by groups of property owners that have homes that are above the average for market value. So the vast majority, they're paying nothing. They'll get no tax relief, and that's because of the ceiling. So some of those might have a ceiling of $0, or they're paying above the ceiling right now. So increasing the exemption would not cause them to pay less. And then a large portion of the value that we would be giving in tax relief is also to property owners that have a little bit more expensive homes. And that doesn't mean everyone in that bucket that's realizing the full benefit has a super high net worth home. But a lot of those do, and a lot of them, for whatever reason, are just far below what their ceiling currently is. That could be for a multitude of reasons. They might have moved to a less expensive house. But there's a lot of tax relief at different levels. Some are getting $25 to $50 off their tax bill. Some of them are getting $50 to $100, and some of those that are in the higher amount, they are in more modestly priced homes right now. So that tax relief would mean a higher percentage of their bill to them if they were to get that. So just to sum that up with fewer numbers, there's several different groups, if we were to increase this exemption, that would be benefiting. So the biggest one is people who are qualifying for the first time, because then their tax bill would be frozen at that lower level. And that's a lifelong benefit to them. And then those who, similar to the example, if they qualified pretty recently, their home might not have risen too far below where that ceiling was calculated. So they would get some relief, probably not as much. And then there's a lot of people who, if something about the nature of their property that they own has changed, then they might not be right at their ceiling either, and they should get some benefit. But the biggest thing I think to take away is if they've qualified recently for the exemption, they'll get something out of this. Otherwise, they might have seen their home increase by too much value for $20,000 to change it. So a week from now, on May 14th, we have a resolution or an ordinance prepared on both this and the child care providers tax exemption that the plan is to bring to you. So that would increase this from 60,000 to 80,000, and that would grant a 100% exemption to child care providers on their Fort Worth property tax.
Any questions of Brady? Macy?
Thank you, Brady. This is more of a request for next time. I think as we're going through the budget workshops, it'd be helpful too to have a list of how these exemptions are going to impact the bottom line. So we're looking at the revenue and the expenses, but also the liabilities if we have that, if we do grant these exemptions at 100%, and then the additional for the over 65 and disabled, just how that impacts the overall budget as we're looking at the big picture.
Absolutely.
Any other questions, council? Okay, looks like we're ready to move on to our last briefing, which is with Val Washington and Cody Wittenberg to give a briefing on waste management service levels.
Mayor and council, I'm just going to give a brief introduction, and then Cody Wittenberg is going to give this presentation, and we have waste management also in the audience who's available to comment and answer questions as needed. And we understand some of those basic rules that society forms. If you push someone, you say, "Excuse me." You don't talk about people's mothers, and you also don't mess around with residential solid waste pickup. And we understand that and hear you loud and clear. I'd say since COVID, there have been some challenges with our customer service and providing those services to our residents. We've come to mayor and council in the last couple of years and talked about reroutes and other items that the team was using to address some of those service concerns. We wanted to take time today to really outline and acknowledge some of the service issues that our residents have been, experiencing. And just to show that as we talk with mayor and council, we are not oblivious to those issues, and we want to be really open and transparent, and also talk about solutions we have in place to address those those concerns. Cody, if I can turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon again. So I think Valerie is absolutely correct. Trash service, residential trash service is one of those core services that we offer at the city. And I thank you for a few minutes to walk you through some of the challenges we're having and a plan to correct those. So this overview for the presentation, we're going to focus on those goals and those guiding principles for our residential collection program, then talk about some highlights, what the data is showing us, and then stress some of those customer service issues that we are acknowledging today that need to be corrected, and a plan to address those. So when you focus on our residential collection programs, we center around four goals or four guiding principles. One is to offer exceptional customer service, and that's not just for city staff as a core value of the city of Fort Worth and our staff, but that also extends to our contractors and everyone that represents our organization. The second piece is a value to our Fort Worth residents. We understand that we want to provide the best service and the best value possible in this space. Third, of course, is to create and maintain a clean and attractive city by properly managing our trash services, our waste and garbage and others. That also impacts how our city is perceived. And then finally, promoting diversion and promoting a landfill life that is extended to the maximum extent. So we talk about our residential trash program currently. There are 4 lines of service: garbage, recycling, yard waste, and bulk. 3 of those are on a weekly schedule. And you can imagine if everyone set out every line of service each week or month, that could be over 3.3 million touch points that we have with our customers in that given month. Of course, we know that everyone sets out every line of service each week or each month. And so we actually have about closer to maybe 1.1 million touch points. But our goal is always the same. No matter how much material is set out for collection, Our goal is to have 0 issues, and our goal is to have 100% collection on all of those lines of service. Of course, we realize that sometimes miscollections do occur, and recently we have to honor that we've gone above our goal of a 1% ratio, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the goal is to always manage our services, and currently we are well above that goal at about 1,600 misses per month, rather than even what industry standard would allow, which is around 1,100. So as we've heard from our residents, as we've heard from complaints and concerns that we've experienced or witnessed ourselves, there is a concern for just the general disregard for customers and the standard of care that we're able to provide currently. We have incomplete routes, which we talk about frequently. Miscollections, of course. Miscollections specifically for our customers that have carryout service and who are maybe disabled. And then also we just have some standards of care for our equipment. Inadequate or equipment maintenance has come to the forefront in recent weeks. Just to give you an example of data, there's a lot of different ways that you can catalog or capture what is happening with our services. This is one way that we measure the number of miscollections with respect to the number of households we're serving. That number at the bottom at 1.52, that should be below a 1.0 again. Perhaps even more alarming is the miscollections for our customers with carryout service. Again, these are individuals with disabilities who cannot push those carts to the curb or out front. And you can see that that ratio is currently at a 29.1 ratio. Again, that ratio should be below 1 for this group of customers as well. And if you think about that 1.0 ratio, just to familiarize you with this particular chart, the blue columns or bars on this graph show the number of households that we've served over time. That red line, again, is that magic number in this scenario. That orange line should be at or well below that 1.0 at any given time. You'll notice that over time, our miscollections have gone up, and that's what's causing that ratio to also go up. You'll see in 2020 and 2021 during COVID, for perhaps COVID was driving the workforce and other factors to ensure a little bit better service, but you can still see it was still above that 1, and since that time, we've considered to have an incline. I will notice 2024 is only reporting 6 months of data, but currently it is still trending to be at that higher category. So we as staff, our contractors, we wanted to come together to come up with a firm plan to address these issues. And here are 7 steps that we are working together to complete. One is we want to reaffirm customer service expectations with staff and contractors. We want to improve daily communications to everyone about those incomplete routes when they're going to occur for the day, maximizing efforts to help our residents with reporting any miscollection. It's very important that we know if a miscollection has happened. Number 4, we want to resolve miscollections quickly and efficiently, leverage technology and change up the route monitoring that we as staff provide specifically for those customers with disabilities, setting a priority with waste management to repair all equipment within their own fleet or within our subcontractors' fleet, and also adjusting some contract requirements to support WM when they need to flex to cover those routes. So finally, just as we continue to move forward, it's become a new normal that your trash is missed, and we want to undo that new normal. I think that term has come up frequently, and go back to the way that things should be with respect and excellent customer service. And one way you can help us and all residents can help us is if you experience any miss, whether it be recycling or garbage or yard waste or bulk, let us know, preferably the next day. That way if those routes are needing a little bit more time to get complete on that existing day, but please reach out and let us know, because if we may not know it's been missed until you reach out to us and reaffirm that. And you can do that through the call center. It is the best way to get your task order into the system by going to the call center. Their system goes directly into our ISM task order system to help clean that up and get that corrected as quickly as possible. And of course, if there's any challenge, certainly reach out to staff, and happy to take any questions.
Oh, you did, sorry. Questions from council? Charlie, did you have anything?
I don't. We had a good conversation over the weekend, so I really appreciate Valerie and the rest of the team for taking action on this and giving us information that we could actually take out to our residents, letting them know that we not only know what's going on, but there are solutions that are going to be coming forward soon to actually fix the issue.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you. Thanks, Cody. Council, that's the last of our presentations. Do we have any requests for future agenda items or reports? Councilmember Beck?
Yeah, I would like an IR on, when our folks call 911, we have different categories of calls, how they're prioritized. So I think it would be helpful if we had a better understanding of what types of calls are prioritized. And then I'd like to know, in the past 90 days, how many calls have gone unanswered by Fort Worth PD and what priorities they were and what our standard is for when we're just unable to answer a call.
Councilmember Bivens and then Councilmember Martinez.
Just to reiterate, last week, I got some input from citizens last night about an IR that I asked for that they didn't know about. But again, I want to make sure code compliance puts together some kind of training for the convenience stores, the local retail community people, because they need to know how to deal with panhandlers. And they need to know from code compliance what can be done in terms of training.
Councilmember Bivens, and my office is actually working to put together a training with MHMR. We're going to roll it out first in the near south side to kind of see how it goes and then hopefully expand it. But it's a de-escalation training so that our service industry and those folks that are dealing with people that until police can get there, what they can do to help smooth that over.
That's very, very gracious, but some of these people don't need that kind of training. They just need to be moved.
Councilmember Martinez.
I just want to add to Councilwoman Beck's IR. I'd like to hear how many false alarms we're getting from PD. I see reports that, people call in and then it's determined to be false alarm. We're spending all this money on them going out there. Are they intentional false alarms? I don't know. Just what's that history, or just if we can get a number.
Councilmember Hill Williams.
This is a request for any work session or council meeting. I feel like we get our packets last minute. Staff is scrambling around the night before to get our binders put together, and that's not fair to them. It's not fair to us. I don't want to read at 9 o'clock at night or get up early the next morning to read. So I think we just need to be a little bit more respectful on time frame. And if we can get reports in at least 24 hours before the day of the meeting, that would be very helpful.
Councilmember Williams.
Yes, I have one today. It's on, I want to know from neighborhood services, the number of single-family properties in Fort Worth, either owner occupied or either owned by an individual or owned by a corporation. And so if they could give us that breakdown of what percentage of our single-family properties are now owned by corporations, that would be great. And then I've already put this request in, but just following up, I know we had requested from legal department to give us some solutions on what to do about certain uses in proximity of one another. And so just want to bring that back to the top front of mind.
Any other future agenda items from council? Okay, with that, meeting is adjourned.